need this. I just also want to write a few things. Sorry, guys. In my pocket. All right, so I will be speaking about sensory processing. And before we can get to sensory processing, we need to start with our senses. So who can tell me which senses do we have? Shout it out.
Taste.
Taste.
Smell.
Smell. Okay, you guys are faster here. But this is like grade 1, eh? So it's not. Smell. Alright. Anything else?
Sight.
Sight.
Yeah.
Hearing. Yes. Okay, those are the 5 well-known senses. But, trick question, who knows about the hidden senses? Sorry?
The sixth sense.
The 6 senses. All women have.
And we use it.
Okay, so there's hidden senses. The first one is proprioception. And the receptors for proprioception is in the joints and muscles. So what proprioception does is it tells us about the position of our body and the position of our limbs. So I need a volunteer, Ayanda. You can come and stand in front. Close your eyes. I'm going to move Ayanda's one arm and she needs to move the other arm in the same way. Okay. Whoop. Good. All right. Thanks, Ayanda. You can go sit. So the fact that Ayanda could move this one arm in the same way as I moved her other arm is because she's got proprioception. Her body was telling her what was happening with this arm without her having to look at it. It also tells us how much force to use. So if I have to pack or pick up a bag of luggage that I've packed for a 2-week holiday compared to picking up my handbag, how much force will I use? And that's what proprioception tells us. The next one is the vestibular sense. And those receptors are in the inner ear, and it's telling us about the movement of my body in space, but also the position of my head. So if I'm standing in an elevator, I close my eyes, someone else pushes the button, it's the vestibular sense that tells me whether we're going up or down. These senses give me information about my body, and these ones give us information about the environment. These hidden senses, these hidden senses are really important because they also help with the development of gross motor skills, like Steph said. So this is how the things are starting to come together. We need good proprioceptive sense, good vestibular sense to develop muscle tone, body awareness, balance, motor planning. But these senses are also very important when it comes to calming our children down, and we're going to get to that a little bit later. So, okay, I'm going to take this off. While I'm taking this off, can anyone take a chance to tell me what you think sensory processing is then? Quiet class. So sensory processing will then be the way that we interpret and organize sensory information coming from the environment, coming from our bodies, and then being able to respond appropriately in a situation. All of this happens in the brain. So let's say I smell smoke. My brain is telling me there might be a fire. I need to run around, see if there's a fire. If there's a fire, I run out, I call the fire brigade. So it's telling me how to respond appropriately. Now, there's 3 ways roughly that we can process sensory information. The first one is typical processing. So I get the information, my brain can filter it, it can focus on the most important things, and I can function quite well. I can learn new skills, I can be independent. But there are also some challenges when it comes to sensory processing. And children with autism often have sensory processing difficulties, although it's not limited to just children with autism. We all actually have a sensory profile. People with other diagnoses might have sensory processing difficulties. People without a diagnosis could also have it. But it is one of the key signs as well of autism. So the two ways that it can be challenging is the first one is where a child is over-responsive, which means they react very quickly to sensory information, or they react more intensely to sensory information. It's like having a very small bucket. Okay, so if I put sensory input in here, just a little bit of sensory input, and then my bucket is full. My bucket overflows, and that causes me to feel anxious. So it means that a child also feels the input more intense. I want to tell you about a boy that I assessed a while ago. He was struggling with the school uniform, so I had to assess him and write a letter so that he can wear something different and still stay in school. And in my mind, I thought he didn't like the way that the school uniform is feeling, so I thought he's sensitive to the tactile input. And when I asked him, his biggest concern was the sound that his collar was making. So he really was so sensitive to the auditory input that the sound that his collar was making was disturbing him every moment of the day because he was moving his head the whole time. So I didn't even think about the sound that the collar can make, and I don't know if any of you have thought about the sound of a collar, but for him it was so intense that it really was disturbing him most of the time. So that is the over-responsive child. Then we can get an under-responsive child, and that is the child that needs a lot more input before they actually register it. So they need more or more intense input. And that is now a child with a big bucket. So the input goes in, but their bucket's not full enough. And we need a full bucket to feel happy and calm and ready to learn. We call that regulated. So if I don't have a full bucket, I'm not going to be calm, I'm not going to be ready to learn. So that's the under-responsive child. I want to quickly draw something. Do you have the black stick? Just don't have the red, will be so clear. So you can have your over-responsive child, you can have an under-responsive child. So this is how you respond to the information. Then the action you can take, you can either be passive or active. And this is going to give us different ways that we will see this happening in our kids. So if you have an over-responsive child, so the one with the small bucket, the sensitive child, in a situation where they feel overwhelmed and they're passive, they might just become really overwhelmed, and they might just kind of freeze and stay there and not do anything to get out of it. So you might have a very distractible child. Ooh, I'm worried about the spelling as well now. Or you can have an emotional outburst. So all of this is happening to me. I'm overwhelmed, but I'm not doing anything. I just start crying or falling on the floor, or I'm just so distracted that I can't focus on what's happening. But if you're an active child and you're over-responsive, then you're not going to allow this to happen to you. And even before you can get overwhelmed, you are going to stop that. So you're going to start avoiding things. So you walk closer. Oh, Teacher Dorcas has painting. No, thank you. That's not for me. And then they move away. So they're going to start avoiding activities that can be stressful, or they're going to be very controlling, always wanting to be the boss in a play situation, always wanting to hold things because it's their way of trying to predict what's going to happen in their world. They can seem stubborn, they can seem uncooperative because they're trying to control. This would be avoiding or controlling. So both of this is actually a problem, because if I have a child in class that has all of these emotional outbursts and they get overwhelmed so quickly and they don't know how to help themselves before they get to that, then it's going to be difficult to teach them. But if we have someone that's always avoiding, it's obviously also difficult to teach them some of those skills that the teachers need to work on. Then with an under-responsive child, if the child is passive, they're just going to end up having an empty bucket the whole day. Because they don't do much to fill up this bucket. The bucket just stays empty. They just miss some of the input. They just seem slow. It feels like you can't get them to wake up, you know? You feel like you want to give them a bit of a kick in the butt to just get going, you know? Do something. Or if you're active, then this child knows there's a problem with my bucket. It's not full, and they take on the task to fill it themselves. So they go looking for input. They might be the ones that seem to be a bit all over the place. They're running from one side to the next, climbing, jumping, looking at things, touching people the whole time. So they are trying to fill up their buckets themselves. So this gives us. So with an empty bucket, a child that's slow and kind of sleepy, you're not getting them to do the things you want them to do. With a seeker, you're not getting them to sit still to do the things you want them to do. And our job is to help our children to get to that point where their buckets are just full, where they are regulated, where they're feeling happy and calm and ready to learn, or ready to play, or ready to get dressed, or whatever we want them to do. Each person has a sensory profile. So I've got one, you've got one, our kids all have a sensory profile. The thing that makes it a bit tricky is sometimes, well not sometimes, always, each of our sensory systems has their own bucket system. So I can have a small bucket for auditory input, so for hearing or sounds, but I could have a big bucket for movement. And it's not always as easy to say we're a big bucket or a small bucket child. Sometimes we need to try and figure out exactly where our child is in all of those systems so that we can help them in the right way. So before we get to a bit of a practical thing, I need a few volunteers to do things for me. So the first one is someone that is willing to eat a slice of lemon. Who is daring enough to eat a slice of lemon? No one? Ayanda, she's a good volunteer. Okay, Ayanda, eat it. And tell me what it tastes like. Is it yummy? Is it not so yummy?
I love that one.
Right, okay. Who absolutely would not have wanted to taste that lemon? Alright, it's telling us a bit about your bucket for taste. Ayanda says, oh, I love it. Big bucket, probably there. Most people don't love lemon. Renee says, small bucket for taste. Okay, the next one, who is willing to stand up, close their eyes, spin around 5 times?
Abby.
Can you please stand up? Spin around. I mean, you're actually the volunteer for all of the big buckets. Yeah. Go. 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Stop. Okay, how did it feel, Abby?
Oh, so nice.
Abby has a big bucket to see. Who got dizzy just watching Abby? Alright, last one. This is the most fun one. Who's willing to put their hands in the slime to take out something? A magic surprise.
Oh, Bundy.
Okay, you can take the whole bucket and find the surprise.
Our teachers are used to it.
Okay, it's a minion! Yay! Alright, how did it feel, Bongi? But was it nice? You enjoyed it? Okay. Who would not have wanted to put their hands in the slime? Do you see a trend happening on the nice Alright, so it's telling us a little bit about our own bucket. So obviously we all have our own bucket. But now we're here for our kids' day, so we're going to figure out their bucket. So what I want you to do, we're going to do a bit of a practical thing. I'm going to give you all a little map. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to think about your own child, all of their senses, and what you think their buckets are. So the coding for coloring this is red or orange is for a sensitive child or a small bucket. It means, oh no, stop there, I'm a bit cautious about that, that's why I chose that color. If your child has a big bucket for a certain system, you're going to use green. It means go, 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 fill up my bucket with more of this. And then if you think everything is going well in that system, you can make it blue, calm, and everything is going well, smooth sailing. I'm going to show you mine. Okay, so I have a bit of a trend as well. So some people can have mostly sensitive, which means it will be mostly red. Some people can have mostly under-responsive, mostly green, or you can have a mix which makes it a little bit more tricky. But mine is a little bit of sensitivity, a little bit for vision. I always have to use sunglasses, can't go outside without them. Even when it's cloudy, I need sunglasses. Also, when there's lots of background noise, this is now hearing, I struggle to focus. So I don't melt down, but I just cannot keep my mind when there's lots of background noises. So that's a bit of sensitivity. And then the rest of the things actually have big buckets. I'm a bit clumsy when it comes to the proprioceptive things. I like big hugs. I like sometimes like stamping my feet. I like movement. So I've done skydiving, I've done paragliding. Those things are fun. I like roller coasters. I like playing with slime and touching different textures, and I have a bit of a poor sense of smell. So someone will smell something and then I'm like, oh, I don't smell this. So you can see I am green most of it, but actually this is what I look like. So as a child I was this, I struggled. My nickname, believe it or not, was Slucky, which means snail. Not a very nice nickname to have. But once I learned about sensory processing, I was like, that's why I was Slucky, because I'm slow, and I'm unfortunately passive as well. So I understood why I infuriated my mother and many other people. But this is what I look like now. So although I have my profile, you can still see the same colors. Most of it is blue because I've learned how to cope with this, okay? And that's where we're wanting to move with our kids. So still have the profile, but they know how to deal with it. That's probably how most of you guys would look. You know, we've got a profile, but we can cope with it, we can function. All right, so you're all getting one of these ones for your own child. And please just take 5 minutes to quickly complete it. I'm going to give you something to color in with. And if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to ask me. If you're unsure and you really don't know how to figure this out, then we can have a WhatsApp video call and we can chat about it a bit, especially if you're maybe new and you're not sure about it yet. So, okay, I think we're going to continue. You can still use the break to maybe finish this or afterwards. I just want to give you a few signs of small buckets. So now you might hear some of these things and then know, okay, this is my son or my daughter. If the child has a small bucket for their auditory system, they could be the ones closing their ears when there's loud noises. They could be the ones getting very distractible when there's lots of background noise, or maybe even crying when something is really loud. Sometimes if there's loud music, we see that some of the kids start crying in class, for instance. Or if someone else is crying, then that's too loud and then they also start crying. If you have a small bucket for vision, then you might avoid bright light. Close your eyes or hide behind your arm if you're moving into sunlight, or even when a classroom or a fluorescent light is too bright. Things like avoiding to touch textures. Sometimes children touch textures, but then they start drooling. So that also shows us that this is actually getting too overwhelming for them. Children that don't like touch, or they don't like hugs and cuddles and physical affection, that can be sensitivity to the touch input. If you're struggling with wearing certain types of clothing or wearing shoes, that can be sensitivity. Picky eating can be sensitivity to texture of the food, to taste, to smell, to even the look of food, the way that it looks, if it's mixed up, the way that it's presented. If a child is avoiding movement, so you take them to the park, you think it's a wonderful day, you did such a nice thing, and they don't want to play on any of it, they might be avoiding the movement. Sometimes children are really bothered by smells, things that you don't even smell. 2 houses down, someone is making, I don't know, mussel, tripe, and then that might bother them. And then grinding. So often when children grind, that could be a sign of them being sensitive. Then the big bucket children are the busy ones that struggle to sit still. So that's in the vestibular system, the movement system. They might be looking for movement the whole time. The kids taking risks, they have big buckets for the vestibular system. The problem is they're wanting more intense input. So if I want more intense, I want to climb higher, I want to jump further, I want to crash harder. So they're looking for more of that, but also if it affects their gross motor skills, they don't have the best body awareness or motor planning. So they see something they can do, but they don't know that their bodies can't really do this. This is a bit unsafe for me. And that's where the risk taking comes in. And that's why we need to help them fill up their buckets with something that's a bit more appropriate, so that they have a full bucket and they don't have to necessarily go looking for these risk-taking activities. Children that play too rough, they have big buckets for the proprioceptive system that sometimes touch too hard. Sometimes we have pets, some of the kids go really hard and they squeeze the dogs or the bunnies. It's because they're not sure how much force to use and they're using more force than necessary. Kids that walk with heavy feet often have big proprioceptive buckets. When they mouth things, so putting everything they get in their mouths can be a sign of a big bucket. Children smelling everything, children touching everything, making strange noises. But also, if you see your child is a bit passive or slow, that could also be a big bucket. So our goal is, like I said, is to make all of these circles blue actually, to get all of our kids regulated and ready to learn. They can't just do it magically out of their own. It took us forever until we're adults to be able to do it. So if you start with co-regulation, it means we show them what to do, and then later on we can expect self-regulation where they can calm themselves down. What we can do to help, for a small bucket child, we want to first stretch that bucket so they can cope with more input. But that happens by slowly exposing them to whatever is something that they're sensitive to. So if they don't like textures, we will slowly expose them to new textures. We never force them, but we encourage them to participate. Sometimes just watching us participate is where we start, and then slowly we help them. The second part is that we then try and calm them down. Not try, we do. We calm them down when they're getting overwhelmed. So there's basically 2 things that we need to do for a sensitive child. And then calming down can happen through things like the calm down corner, helping them escape to a calm down corner, or a space that's a bit calmer. So whenever you're, let's say, shopping and your child is getting overwhelmed, you need to know what is the fastest way to get to a calmer space so that I can take my child out of this overwhelming situation. We also need to use sensory strategies to calm them down, and that's where our hidden senses come in. Things like deep pressure hugs work well to calm a child down. Things like slow rhythmic movement can calm a child down. So if you think of a baby, Jashan's mom has the most experience recently. Things like rocking a baby, that's a slow rhythmic movement. Swaddling them up tight, that's the deep pressure. When we want to put a baby to sleep, we go shh, 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 shh. So that's white noise that can help us calm down. And we pop a dummy in their mouths and they're sucking, and that can help to calm down. So we can use all of those things for our bigger children as well. It just looks a little bit different. Things like compressions, movements, that's why we have lots of swings. Slow rhythmic swings in the hammock, jumping on the trampoline, slow rhythmically can help to calm them down. Sucking and blowing, just want to see what else. Repetitive activities can also help to calm them down.
When you're ready.
What I want to say with the repetitive activity Steph said about RRBs, repetitive interests and behaviors, sometimes children use their RRBs, their interests, their repetitive behaviors to help themselves calm down when they're feeling overwhelmed. So it does have a function. You don't want to just take it away because it's serving a purpose. Sometimes it's a bit inappropriate, so we want to make it more inappropriate. So let's say we have a child that likes looking at things falling down, for instance. And they might just be throwing everything up in the air and sitting in their own corner and doing that the whole time. We want to replace it with something that still has the same sensory element, but that is a bit more appropriate. So then maybe having bubbles would be a nice thing, so I can watch it fall down. I can join the group, and now there's more function happening, but it's still working with your child and what their interests and their behaviors are. Special interests can often also help to calm a child down. So if you give them a book with trucks maybe, or certain kids like vehicles or dinosaurs, then that can help them to calm down if they're feeling a bit overwhelmed. Okay?
I just want to mention, I know that it's sometimes hard. So the calming down part makes sense, but our sensitive children, us exposing them slowly with the, to help them learn to regulate their sensitivities is where I find parents are a bit nervous about. So say for example a child, we often have children walking on their tippy toes. And it's not something we want to take away completely, but we do need to slowly start exposing them so that we can get them to a place where maybe they're not walking on their tippy toes all the time. So we want to ask that you help us and you enforce it also at home, little bits. Just help us little bit by little bit to slowly start working on those sensitive areas, because we want to get them to a space where they are blue and they're regulated, they can cope.
Yeah. Right. And I think, so it is different for each child, and sometimes one thing works for one child and not necessarily for the other. But where it is really important is that we start working together, and if you know what works for your child, please tell us, because then we can use that in the class. And if we see what's working for us, we'll tell you, and we can kind of work together. But even if you check on Seesaw, you see what we're doing, try some of those things slowly at home. Try and incorporate some of those things. If you don't know, please just send a WhatsApp, and then I can just explain it to you guys as well. There are some sensory tools that you can use for sensitive kids, and some of them are packed out there very nicely. Things like noise-cancelling headphones you can have, so it takes out the background noise and you can still focus on the speech maybe. You get really fancy ones. Then you also get just the earmuffs you can get from Temu, which is usually a good start. Because if a child, or the China shop, they buy it from Temu. So if your child also has some tactile sensitivity, earmuffs might be tricky for them to cope with. So if you start by buying the most expensive ones, you might end up throwing them in the bin. So start with kind of the cheaper ones, trying different things. Sunglasses could work pretty well. Chewy necklaces work well. Nolene is demonstrating. There's a lot of variety. Again, with chewy necklaces, we start with the more affordable option. So those things, we cut a small piece, put it around your neck with a string, and you can chew on that. And if we see it really works, we give your child, yes, just like that. We give your child one of the more sturdy silicone ones that we can help to get them to chew on that if there are kids that mouth lots of things, but also if you've got a child that's grinding because of anxiety, because of sensitivities, that just saves their teeth. It makes it safer for them to do what they need to do, but it's also giving that calming input through the joints. And then with picky eating, and I'm not going to say too much about it, but again, it's slowly exposing your children to it. And it's really a very long process. So it can start with being in the same space as the food. So sometimes when we have food play, there are children that completely avoid that table. They just walk away and they're on this side and there's letters on that side. So being in it, in the space with it, touching it, then maybe smelling it, licking it, putting it in your mouth, and spitting it out, chewing it, and swallowing it. But this doesn't happen in 6 days, it happens in months. And it can only happen if you continuously expose your child to a specific food, because it needs to become safe for them. So if you decide bread is what we're working on, then you need to give your child a piece of bread every single day, and bread in your plate so that they can see it's safe, and repeat it as often as possible, slowly getting there. But the dietitian would be able to tell us more about this, and also while they're picky, you need to make sure that they're getting the right nutrients, so that's why a dietitian is really important in this journey with us. Also, they can sometimes help with things called chaining, so your child maybe eats noodles, and then you add something that's close to noodles, like plain pasta, and then you add something that's kind of similar to that, tomato sauce plus pasta, and then you end up with bolognese, for instance. But it's chaining it, and they can also help a bit with that. But slowly exposing is the big thing. I'm almost done, I promise. If you've got an under-responsive child, it's really important to give them lots of movement input. It's important to make sure that regularly through the day you're bringing in a sensory diet where you fill up their buckets the whole time. So before we go to school, we move. At school, there's lots of movement, and the teachers have sensory diets for all of our kids, making sure they get the right movement. At home, we need to move the whole time. You can also give them things like lots of messy play activities. Pack out some nice sensory activities if it's something that they enjoy doing. Things like crashing is really nice for your kids. Big pile of pillows, running and crashing into that. That helps to fill up the bucket. Big hugs and compressions, which I won't demo because we don't have time, but I'll make a video. Giving them lots of crunchy snacks, using the chewy necklaces. And things like fidget toys also work well, or having those squishy balls or those things that you can pull. All of those things help to fill up their bucket. But